It's been 80 years since the Holocaust, 8 decades since the world witnessed one of the history's darkest chapters and atrocities in modern times. The systematic state-sponsored persecution and murder of 6 million Jews by the Nazi regime and its collaborators happened between 1939 and 1945. Today, there are only some 220,000 survivors still living, and of those, 1,400 over the age of 100 years old. As of 2025, approximately 38,000 survivors live in the United States, and within the next decade, 70% of those will no longer be with us. Their stories will live on in libraries, museums, through relatives' collective memory. This program, The Voices from the Holocaust, originally ran as a 7-part series, and in this condensed version, we will hear the stories of 7 survivors and 3 descendants who carry the legacy of their parents and grandparents. Stories of escape, by crossing countries by foot, by hiding in forests, or even false closet walls. Stories of living in ghettos during the war and displaced persons camps, enduring the hell of concentration camps, one surviving 12 of them. And after the war, their families fragmented while others were orphaned. Included in their raw and painful stories, though, there is another voice of resiliency and courage. Let us listen and remember together. Allan J. Hall was born in Poland, 1935. Allan's memoir, Hiding in Plain Sight, is his family's story. During the war, from the age of 7 to 9, he and his mother hid in his father's office closet. Later in the war, his parents sent him and his toddler brother on a perilous journey alone, telling them to go to Palestine, and they would meet them there. They never made it to modern-day Israel, but they did meet up with his parents. Allan speaks about the childhood he never had. Allan would earn his law degree from the University of Florida and become a respected professor. He recently was inducted into the Hall of Fame of his former alma mater, Miami Beach High.
Antisemitism today is bubbling out through the internet from the common people. So it's quite different, although I don't minimize the risk. I understand the difference of it, but I think what we have not been very good at is figuring out how to counteract the anti-Semitism effectively. In my opinion, and I'm too old, I don't understand the various media, but I would go into wherever there's an anti-Semitic word, I would go with a counter message so that there are always counter messages. And I don't claim to be knowledgeable, not at all. But I think we have to fight it much more vigorously than we're doing it now. Because it will spread. There's no question about it. And it baffles me why it has continued for 2,000 years. And there seems to be for a moment I thought that it was going to abate, but I don't see any evidence of that.
Any parting messages?
Yes. What you have heard is a man, an old man, who has spent years in psychotherapy and who's not ashamed of it at all. And there are so many other people that have a need for help. And I think, please don't worry about the stigma. There is no stigma. Get yourself well. With the help of psychotherapy, I've been successful in building a family. I've been successful in getting an education. I've been successful in building a career. I've been successful in many ways.
Jack Waksal, born in 1924 Poland, is 101 years old. After surviving multiple labor camps, escaping mass shootings, and losing nearly all of his family, including his brother, Jack hid in the forest until liberation in 1945. He later reunited with a fellow survivor, Sabina, and they married in a displaced persons camp in Germany. The couple immigrated to the U.S. in 1950, settling in Dayton, Ohio.
They took my father, and I know right away that he's going to be killed. I said to the German, take me for this guy. When I told him, he picked me up here like this, pulled me out, and pushed my father back. I was happy. Did I know that I'm going to be killed? Yeah, probably, yes. I didn't care. When they come out with over 50-some people in the beginning, it was already after 4 o'clock in November, and they said, we're going to go to the forest. It was not far away from the forest where they make the grave. They put us in, you have to walk single-wise, one each underneath the other. And when we come to the grave, told us to kneel down. When we kneel down, the officer was on the one side and the left, and the rest of them, the SS, Ukraine, was working with the Germans. They was with the guns. And they said, they asked the officer, when we going to start shooting? He said, I'm going to show you how to do it. When I go after my pistol, I'm going to show you how to do it. And I said to the guy in the front, I was the second in the line. I said, if he's going to go for the gun, before he got, I talked to him Polish, and I said, get up and let's fight. And that's when he started to go after the gun, we did it. And it was close to the grave, and we was fighting. We fell in the grave, all the three of us, with the German, and he started to holler on German, not shooting. If not, they would kill him too.
Lucy Lowell was born in Germany, 1921, making her one of 1,400 Holocaust centenarians still alive. She describes her childhood as joyful. Lucy and her family were at the 1936 Berlin Olympics when Jesse Owens, an African-American athlete, defied Nazi racial ideology by winning 4 gold medals and outshining Hitler-supported German competitors on their home turf. During the Holocaust, though, Lucy lost both of her parents in the Lutz Ghetto and later her brother in a concentration camp. Lucy came to the United States at the age of 23. She met her husband and eventually settled in Miami. Now, at the age of 103, Lucy shared, "Now people want to hear my story. Only now am I famous." Recently, she was given a proclamation from the city of Miami Beach, Florida. But one of the things that stands out for me, in 1936, 36, the Olympic Games were being hosted in Germany.
Yes.
At that time, there was a young black man.
Jesse Owens.
That's right. Tell me what that was like to be witnessing history with your parents and your brother. What was that like? Did you understand what was going on, or was it later on you
Well, no, at the time I knew that Hitler was a racist, and only the German, the Aryan race was for him. So I knew that. And also benches already at that time had signs that Jews were not allowed to sit down there, like in a park or wherever, so public. But they erased that for the Olympics, because so many foreigners were in town, they didn't want to see that. But later it came back, and later we had to wear the star on our clothing so that they would really recognize us, because some people didn't look what they say look Jewish,
What is your legacy to the world? What do you want people to remember about our time here together and the life that you led?
Yeah, maybe if you're optimistic and have the will, maybe, and have luck. I think I was lucky in many ways. I had a good husband. Had a good life. And I still like to stick around.
Paulette Pfeiffer, affectionately known as Tinkerbell, was born around April 1945, though the exact date is unknown since her birth records were destroyed. During the war, Paulette was carried in the arms of her parents on a harrowing and dangerous journey from Russia to Poland. A first-generation Holocaust survivor, Paulette faced unimaginable challenges, enduring life in refugee camps before making her way through South Africa and ultimately settling in Miami. In 2002, she established the Silent Victims of Crime, an organization dedicated to supporting children with incarcerated parents, helping them make positive life choices and growing into contributing members of our society.
But my parents were hiding during the Holocaust in Russia. And it was my parents and my one more couple that escaped the Holocaust, because they were in Poland. There were only 200 survivors of millions. So my parents did the right thing. But when they escaped, they left the whole family behind, and they all got exterminated. I was born in, we think, we're not 100% sure, in April of 1945. It could have been a few months earlier, it could have been later, but by the time we got to Poland, I guess it was April 3rd of 1945, but my parents walked from Russia to Poland with me in their arms. I was only a few months old.
Joseph Alexander, 102 years old, survived 12 Nazi concentration camps, coming face to face with Dr. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death. At the age of 16, his identity was stripped and he became number 142584. He lost his entire family during the Holocaust, his mother, father, and brother. After liberation, Joseph arrived in America in 1949, spending decades sharing his story, not to seek revenge, but to ensure we never forget.
Few survivors left, so we have to tell our story. Because, 6 million and 1.5 million children were murdered by the Nazis. So we have to talk for them. They can't talk. So let the people know what happened to prevent another Holocaust. Because I talked to public schools, the middle school and the high school students. I was told that 70% of those kids never heard about the Holocaust. So I talked to them.
Dr. Miriam Klein Kassenoff was born in 1936 or 37, depending on the documents, in Slovakia. When the war broke out, she, her parents, and infant brother fled on foot, traveling through dozens of countries and eventually landing in Lisbon, Portugal. As Miriam shares, we were able to breathe a little easier, taking in the salty air and sea. Eventually making Miami her home, Dr. Kassenoff is dedicated to Holocaust education, the founding director of the Teacher Institute on Holocaust Studies at the University of Miami School of Education.
The Nazi police, Hungarian police, broke in and grabbed my father by his elbows and dragged him out. And my mother screamed, and she hid me and my baby brother in the closet. And when I came out, I said, in Hungarian, that's the language I spoke then, "Where's Daddy?" And she said, "They took him away. They took him away. They took him to a camp." Why? Because we're Jewish. And as I say today to my student audiences and my teacher audiences, because everybody wants to know about anti-Semitism, for me, my story is more about the beginnings and the rise of anti-Semitism for me, because it's been around a long time. But for me, that was my first knowledge that there must be something terrible about being a Jew. I always thought it was a beautiful thing.
Jennifer Weisfich's grandmother, Judith, affectionately called Bubby, Yiddish for grandmother, was born in Hungary in 1925. At the age of 19, she was deported to Auschwitz, where she was identified by number A6933, forever tattooed on her arm. Today, Jennifer honors her Bubby's legacy by sharing her story through education. She serves as a Holocaust docent, dedicated to ensuring that future generations remember the past and work to prevent such atrocities from ever happening again.
There was no sense of urgency that they had to leave. They were not aware that over 5 million Jews had already been murdered. It just wasn't in this little farming village. They didn't get news. It wasn't a common knowledge. They weren't aware of what was happening. So, but again, her aunt had a sense. And when they arrived at Auschwitz, she was screaming, "I took my children to be slaughtered. We're all here to be slaughtered." And my grandmother was like, my aunt's losing her mind, but she had this sense. And her little brother, her only brother, who was 8 years old, he turned back and he looked at my grandmother and he said, "I'm too young to die." And, so the men and women were separated immediately. They were separated. And my grandmother was holding her youngest sister, Edith, in her arms. And, any mothers and children, they went to one side. And if you looked healthy to work, and, men, they got sent to another side. And because she was holding this little child in her arm, they sent her with her mother to what would have been the line to the gas chambers. And, it's much easier to get a child to go somewhere with their mother. And what mother is going to leave their child behind? But her mother had this inclination, give me the child. Your other two sisters are in that line. Go join them. And remember to always keep the Sabbath. So with doing so, not knowing what was the difference, my grandmother went in the other line. This line was the people were sent to do slave labor. They were immediately dehumanized. She had her head shaven, her beautiful blonde hair was shaved down, she was almost bald, and she was no longer a human. She was now A6933. That's the number that was tattooed on her arm. So with 3G Miami, we go into schools and we speak with students about our grandparents. We're the voice for those who can no longer speak, who are no longer with us. And unfortunately, one day, there will not be any survivors left to tell their stories. I actually learned my grandmother's story in 6th grade with the 200 other kids in my grade because she came to our school and she told her story. And she spent the last 2 decades of her life going to schools and telling her story. So I watched kids go up to her, hugging her, crying, her showing her tattoo, seeing the letters that they wrote to her. I mean, the impact that she left on thousands of students was just immense. And so today, by continuing this education and getting this story out to students, I think it's very important. You know, this anti-Semitism is not something that the Nazis created. It was well established before them. It is still going strong today. And it's up to us to never allow these stories to disappear with our grandparents. Everybody should know what happened. I think it's Stephen Hawking who says that the past tells us who we are, and without that, we have no identity. So I not only tell the story of my predecessors and where I came from, I also encourage students to learn where they came from.
Murray and Frances Berger's story is one of resiliency and defiance during the Holocaust. As Jewish partisans and members of the legendary Belsky Brigade, depicted in the film Defiance, they fought back against the Nazi forces. Murray was among the first brigade's original fighters, while Frances became the first woman in the unit to be issued a rifle. Though their paths began separately, they ultimately stood side by side, surviving the unthinkable and rescuing others along the way. Their powerful legacy lives on in With Courage Shall We Fight, a book co-edited by their sons Ralph Berger and the late Albert Berger. Through their memoirs and poetry, the book preserves the voices of the Holocaust survivors, ensuring their bravery and stories are never forgotten.
This rabbinical student became one of the first 7 men to escape from the ghetto after hearing that the Belsky brothers were forming a Jewish partisan unit.
And what's unique about this is years later, this story was made into a movie called Defiance.
Correct.
So he was with the Belsky brothers. And what did he do? How long was he with them in the forest?
He was one of the organizers of the brigade. He was a fighter in the brigade. They were in the woods for 2 years, and they rescued other Jews. I will never forget being at a bas mitzvah in California a few years after my parents had died. A woman, older woman, came running up to us. She could barely catch her breath. She was trailed by a middle-aged man who was smiling, trying to keep up with her. And she pointed to me and my brother Al, and she said, "You're Murray Berger's sons. You're Murray Berger's sons. Your father carried me and my son out of the ghetto." And up until that day, we had never heard this story. My dad was a very modest man. In August 1942, and coincidentally 10 years to the day that I was born, the Nazis massacred over 4,000 Jews from the Novograd ghetto. Most of my mother's family was murdered in that massacre. My mother and her sister-in-law, Judith, survived by hiding in a cesspool for 6 days without food or water. German shepherds broke through the smell as the Nazis were searching for people hiding. The Nazis shot into the pit. There were already 2 women in there when my mother and aunt got there. One of those women was murdered. My mom had a bullet graze her arm. My uncle Ben Sion Gokavich, rescued my mom and my aunt, and several weeks later, they escaped with others and went into the brigade. My mom was the first woman in the brigade to be issued a weapon. There is a picture of her in the book with other soldiers guarding an airstrip. She is holding a Mauser machine gun, Hitler's buzzsaw. And my parents met in the brigade. They fought together. They lived together. They did not just have a marriage of nearly 50 years. They had a romance for 50 years.
Rose Silverberg was born in Poland, 1916. Rose survived the unimaginable, enduring the Lodz ghetto, where she was experimented on by Dr. Joseph Mengele, and she even escaped a death train after an American bombing raid. Her granddaughter, Hagit Pfefferman, inspired by Rose's strength and resilience, has made it her life's work to honor her legacy through Holocaust education and ensuring future generations never forget and always choose kindness.
In those 3 or 4 years she was in Lodz Ghetto, to be sent on a cattle car to, she knew it wasn't a good place because nobody ever came back. She was snuck off that list 3 times, but the 4th time she wasn't snuck. They were really liquidating the whole camp. She was one of the last transports by that time. And she ends up on the cattle car and arrives at a place called Auschwitz-Birkenau. Birkenau is really the place where the Jews ended up. So she comes off, and immediately in the stories from Auschwitz-Birkenau, there's lots of different ways people were treated. So this is her particular story, that she was told to get naked immediately when she got off the train. She was being poked to see if there were pregnant women. So they were dividing people to one side and the other. Somebody who was a doctor said, "I like the color of your eyes. You can go this way." But her friend with the brown eyes went that way. She probably should have gone straight to her death because she didn't look strong enough, because her whole body was in starvation mode. She didn't look strong enough to be a good slave laborer, but because he liked the color of her eyes, she went to the live side.
Are we talking about Joseph Mengele?
That is the name she would refer to, Joseph Mengele, and she would also call him the Angel of Death. And he put her in groups of experimentation. They would have them do very dehumanizing things. They shaved their head. She actually did not have a tattoo, and the understanding I had was that her group came so late into the camp, the numbers were so high on the tattoo numbering that they wanted to hide how many people they were murdering and keeping as slaves. So they didn't give her the tattoo because they didn't want it to be exposed how high these numbers were. So she was part of an experimentation group that was both men and women in this group. And she said thousands of people were being experimented on.
And we're talking about experimentation without anesthesia, without hygiene, without nothing was sterilized. So Let's take it from there.
So she's being experimented on, given random shots, and doesn't understand, but it's not like she had the availability to ask what's going on and what are you doing to me. And she got very sick from these experiments. She got so sick she wasn't able to eat her bread or swallow for 2 weeks. And they had many roll calls where they would line people up, 5 or 10 at a time, and count them off. And she couldn't stand straight in her roll call one day, so 2 of her friends got close to her on either side to prop her up. But the Nazi SS woman was so unhappy with her slouching that she took out her whip and she beat the 3 women, and that's how she became hard of hearing in one ear permanently. So she ended up passing out from this beating, ended up in a hospital, and a Hungarian Jewish doctor who was under Mengele saved her life and helped her with an abscess that was inside of her throat get removed. And she saved her life again and said, "You're on a list to be exterminated. You volunteer to get out of here any way you can." So she took the advice. And yes, many people were helpful too. So she ended up in Bergen-Belsen, which she slept on the floor like a Cub Scout in a tent there for a little bit of time. And she said it was actually compared to Auschwitz-Birkenau, a little bit of time to recuperate because they didn't have so much cruelty in that camp in her time. And then she ended up being sent on another cattle car to a subcamp of Buchenwald called Elsnig. And she was put in the kitchen, which was an incredible gift for a time. She was also taken out of the kitchen. But while she was making the breakfast for the SS Nazi women, she saw a hidden corridor from the kitchen to the infirmary, and she risked her life every day, and she would bring food to the sick Jewish starving people in the part of that infirmary. So that always inspired me, that even when you have absolutely nothing and everybody's murdered, I can still give love. I can still do whatever I can. And a way of resisting is through love also. So she really taught me that.
The Holocaust did not end in silence. It ended with voices broken, but not defeated. Survivors carried stories not just in their minds, but shared their memories with their children and gave testimonials. They rebuilt lives. They refused to let the truth be buried. And still today, hatred stirs. It whispers with rhetoric. It marches and rallies. It targets Jews and others. It masks, wears disguises. It adapts. It waits for the right time to strike. So we ask again, not only have we learned, but will we act? Not in hindsight, but now. Remembrance without responsibility is not enough. Every survivor's story handed down is not just a memory, it is a warning and a call for justice, a call for truth, a call for a future that refuses to repeat the past. This story is not over. Will we do whatever it takes so another Holocaust never happens again? We are now in that next chapter.